Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenos días. Les agradezco mucho a todos ustedes que se han conectado el día de hoy. Tenemos un webinar muy interesante, precisamente de la compañía de KeyData. Antes de comentarles y presentar a nuestro invitado, quiero darles un poco de información en relación a últimos acontecimientos que tenemos. En relación a la exporrenta vacacional, la estamos planeando del noviembre 8 a noviembre 11 y es la quinta edición, la cual promete estar bastante bien porque tenemos unos invitados interesantes. Va a venir Simon Lehman, que es el gurú de renta vacacional a nivel mundial y que prácticamente opera en diferentes partes del mundo como speaker y dando información muy valiosa. También es muy probable que tengamos ahí una sorpresa a través de Airbnb. Probablemente estamos viendo la opción de traer al director general. También contamos con muchas otras personalidades. Vamos a tener un espacio mucho más grande para conferencias y talleres. Entonces, promete estar bastante bien. Por el otro lado, les comento que a nivel de lo que es la asociación, afortunadamente hemos sido invitados para trabajar en la nueva normativa en relación a hospedaje no hotelero, la cual estamos empezando a trabajar ya junto con diferentes instituciones de secretarías de turismo a nivel nacional y también invitados a participar en esto. Están compañías como Airbnb, Expedia y la Concanaco y algunas otras más. En total somos alrededor de unas 24 instituciones y afortunadamente también la PAR está ya dentro de este proceso y pues representando los intereses tanto de anfitriones como de property managers. Como siguiente punto, pues me gustaría darle la bienvenida a Daniel. Entonces voy a cambiar a inglés. La presentación será en inglés y promete estar muy buena y mucha información, muchas gráficas que van a ser muy interesantes. So, Daniel, thank you very much for being here today. I really appreciate it. Like always, your company and yourself being very supportive of Expo Renta Vacacional and of course the APAR, the Associations for Professional Property Managers and Professional Hosts in Mexico. And I appreciate the fact that you're coming here to tell us exactly what's going on with our market right now, because of course there's a lot of concerns, there's a lot of questions. We have seen some numbers drop, of course, in September, and we just very eager to find out what's happening, and hopefully you can answer some questions for us. So take it away, Daniel. Let us have it.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Manuel. Thank you very much for joining me this morning, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. I think I've got some really great stuff to share with you. We've watched what's happening in vacation rental markets all over the world. And the Mexican vacation rental market over the last 6 months has been a very interesting market. So stuff going on here, and super excited to share all that with you today. Even one big takeaway at the end, I'm going to work in a few hints as we go through today, and so hopefully you guys will start to pick up on where I'm headed about halfway through and see where we're going with some of this data. Now, a lot of the questions that you have as property managers is, man, am I the only one experiencing this thing that's happening in my data? And the big thing that you need to answer is it just you, or is it an entire market problem? And that's where KeyData can really help you. Just to give you a little bit of background about KeyData and our partnership with Expo RV, we are the exclusive data provider for Expo RV, and Manuel sees that value in being able to communicate with all of his members about what is actually going on in the market across the board. A couple key things about KeyData that you guys should understand as we start to go through this presentation is that there are 65 different property management system integrations that KeyData works with. What that means for you is that we're able to directly connect with your property management system, pull your data into our system and give you visualizations to help better run your company. But as we do that, we also compile the market level direct source data, which allows us to see things that others can't in near real time. The data is updated every 12 hours directly through an API integration with your property management system. And that allows us to provide over 40 different key performance indicators that you can measure in real time on about 20 different reports that help with everything from revenue management to owner communications to marketing, etc. But we source that data directly from your local and regional competitors for a comparative data analysis, which means we can see things like cancellations and actual revenue, rather than just scraping it from publicly available sources like Airbnb and VRBO. But we know that we're not going to get 100% of the market to provide us that direct source data, so we do also scrape the major OTAs to provide data on a combination of rentals by owner and professionally managed properties. And that's a big distinction of what we're able to provide for you. And the reason why I go through all of that now is not to sell you on our data. Of course, I want to, but at the end of the day, the data that you're going to be seeing today is a mix of both that direct source data and the scrape data. So we're really seeing the data from all sides and really getting a better picture of the entire market when we show you these stats. Now today we're going to go through and we're going to talk about these specific metrics, but I try not to do a boring presentation. I hope you guys have seen this before. We try to get a little more insightful and a little more exciting with it. So we're going to talk about occupancy, we're going to talk about rates, and we're going to talk about revenue, but we're going to give you a lot of the why behind those metrics and the changes and the trends. We're also going to look at the supply, and then we're going to also talk a little bit about our friend Taylor Swift, who's coming to the market next week. So the first thing that I want to point out is that we're going to talk about the different regions in Mexico. When we do a presentation for an entire country, it's almost impossible to, point out all the different markets. So we kind of broke them down. So with Manuel's help, it was extremely helpful to kind of segment the market. So we've created these different regions of Mexico. So take a second, look at your region and look at the other ones that are maybe a little more interesting to you that you might want to compare to as we go through our data and trends, because we're going to break out all those rate, occupancy, revenue metrics by all these different regions. So take a second to look at that so you know where you're sitting in this mix. And if you have any questions about it, shoot me an email afterwards. It's daniel@keydatadashboard.com. Happy to show you the data for your specific market and show you what we can show you. So now that you understand a little bit about kind of the regional breakdown, let's dive into some of the data. The first thing we're going to talk about is occupancy. Now, there are three big metrics in vacation rentals that people pay attention to most. Like I said, we offer 45 different metrics that we measure. So these are by no stretch of the imagination the only ones, but they're the big three. They're the ones that everybody talks about on a regular basis. Most people measure their success on occupancy, average daily rate, and then if you're a little more advanced, you've gone into revenue per available rental night, or RevPAR. And we'll talk about what that is in a second. To start off with, we're going to look at paid occupancy rate by month throughout Mexico. Now, 2023 has been pacing down compared to 2022 since April. You can see that it was up a little bit for the first few months out of the year, but we've started to see a little bit of contraction, and August is down about 4% compared to last year. September is down about 3%. But October to December are pacing ahead of 2022 again. So we're seeing this very interesting thing. It's kind of a U-shaped average daily rate chart for the year for 2023. Very interesting. Something to keep your eye on is where you're pacing compared to the market, though. And so that's something that you really want to have the ability to benchmark against this. And there's a lot of visualizations that can help you do that within KeyData. So think about that. Basically, we're having a cruel summer is what this is kind of showing you on this chart. But let's talk a little bit specifically about those business, leisure, and urban markets. I love the term leisure. Manuel provided that to us, but those are the markets that kind of mix business and leisure together. And so it's a great term for those markets. And it's a great way to look at the data and segment it out. This is a brand new visualization. This is the first presentation it's ever been used on. I absolutely love it. I think it's very informative, but it shows you by month throughout the year here, particularly in Q3, how we're performing for each of those different regions. And you can see that leisure markets are the one that's, kind of setting us or taking us down right now. The leisure markets are down in July and August, and everything else is pretty flat compared to 2022 when you look at the percentage of occupancy that we see across each of those markets. The difference between August 22 and August 23, for example, in the urban markets is 25 to 26%. That's pretty flat. So not seeing a lot of changes in those occupancy rates across all of the markets with the exception of leisure markets. By the way, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, put them in the chat, even put them in Spanish, and Manuel will feed them to me. So hit us up with any questions that you have throughout the presentation, and I'll try to get to them as soon as possible. Now, so let's talk a little bit about, let's kind of just summarize what we just talked about from an occupancy perspective. Overall, there was, Q3 was pretty soft compared to 2022. The leisure market is experiencing decreased occupancy in July and August, and the urban and leisure market segments are really showing an increase in August. The first takeaway that we've got for today, so if you're writing these down, go ahead and write this one down. You have to be able to react to changing occupancy rates and demand patterns in your market. That post-COVID urban leisure dynamic is really not all fleshed itself out yet. So until it is, we really need to stay on top of what the occupancy rates are down the road, and then manipulating your pricing strategy, your marketing strategy according to what you see in the occupancy changes. Now, the best way to do that is to compare it to the other metrics that are in your arsenal. So let's talk a little bit about rates. You'll hear this referred to as ADR, or average daily rate. And it just says for every night that was booked, how much money did it book for on average? So this is looking at any properties, and it's a great way to understand the value of your properties, and it's one of the biggest impacts on your bottom line is where your average daily rate is. So that's why we talk so much about average daily rate. So let's dive into what's going on in the Mexican market. You can see the ADRs have been down compared to 2022 pretty much all year. The gaps, though, have been growing. In Q3 months are really down 16 to 19%. Now, our smaller units, like one bedrooms, for example, are gaining in popularity. That combined with other factors are driving down rates, and it's not the only reason, though, that rates are down. We're starting to see a lot more supply as well. We'll talk about that in a future screen, but know that that's another big reason why we're starting to see a little bit or a pretty good impact on the number on the rates going down because of the increased supply. This is looking at all of Mexico, but when we look at it regionally, this chart again is showing us for Q3. And this is that brand new visualization, and it does a great job of showing you that leisure is down about 17% in July and August, but it's down about 20% in September. So again, leisure is really sucking everything down when we look at the nationwide statistics. If you look at the leisure, business, and urban markets, they're pretty flat year over year. There might be a little bit down, but it's so slight, it's not making a big difference. That business market is seeing limited growth, up about 1% in July, back down about 3% in August, but then up 6% in September. So that's the one bright spot that we might know all too well. It's writing a little love story, if you will. getting a little bit more than the average.
Daniel,
Yeah.
one question. Do you know what markets in leisure markets are actually making the downfall? I mean, the percentage down?
It's all the ones that you're thinking about. It really is across the board in all those leisure markets that we kind of talked about at the beginning. So Playa del Carmen, Cancun, Cabo is certainly one of those. So we are seeing that pretty much across the board in every leisure market.
All right.
If you have if anybody has a specific question about their particular market, I'm happy to follow up with you after the presentation too, because there is always anomalies, but that one was pretty across the board from an average daily rate perspective. That doesn't mean necessarily that the market isn't making as much money. They're just not making as much money per available booked night. It's a very important distinction there.
Correct.
So rates have really been below 2022 levels throughout the year. The gap has been progressively widening, with Q3 months experiencing a decline around 17 or 18%. Both leisure and urban segments are facing declines in rate, though. So it is something that we are seeing across the board. It's just a lot more pronounced in those leisure markets. So you have to maintain your takeaway. Second takeaway is to maintain competitive rates to capture existing demand effectively. This is something that we talked extensively about with our revenue managers, and we'll start to get into that a little more on the next screens, because we're talking about my favorite metric. It's probably the most exciting metric in the vacation rental space, because it combines the two that we just looked at, rate and occupancy. RevPAR stands for revenue per available rental night. Unlike ADR, which looks at the amount of revenue that was booked divided by the number of nights that were booked, RevPAR looks at the amount of revenue over a time period and says for every night that a unit was available to rent, how much did it rent for? So the big difference there is that we're dividing it by all the available nights rather than just the booked nights. It gives you a better display of the value of your property for every night that it's on your program. This is a really key metric. If you're not measuring RevPAR, get into it. It's probably the biggest game changer in revenue management. So as you start to try to get the most out of your properties, RevPAR is absolutely vital for you to keep track of. Let's dive into that RevPAR number. When we look across Mexico right now, again, you see pretty strong numbers in January, but then we started to fall off. It started the year way ahead of 2022, but then it started slowing behind 22 in March, and it's still not quite recovered. Q3 is showing a large decrease, in June, July, August, and September, about 20% across all those months. And the largest year-over-year gap has been during June and July. The revenues are being cut into substantially as a result. Now, proactive owner communication is going to be your biggest key to keeping your owners happy and keeping that revenue in your house, because although it's less revenue, it's still revenue. And property owners need to understand, and they can't because they don't have access to this data, they need to understand that it's not a you thing, it's a market thing, that everybody's down. And so you're still performing at market levels for them, and they need to understand that. So being proactive with your owners and giving them a chart like this that helps them see, hey, we're in line with the market. I know we're down year over year, but it's not us, it's them. It's a really good way to communicate your effectiveness as a property manager, as an asset manager to those owners.
One question, Daniel. Do you know in what other markets is this trend only particular to Mexico, or any other international market is suffering the same, or what the biggest numbers in RevPAR has been going to?
Absolutely. It's I hate to call it an epidemic, but across all of the United States, there are very few markets that aren't suffering the same trend. When we saw that COVID boom come back Like when people finally got released and could start traveling again, we saw it, all throughout 2021 in the Mountain West, except for as an example. 2022 was still a really strong year, but it even was a little bit behind 2021 in some markets. 2023 has been no different. We continue to see a little bit of a downtrend, but it's still substantially way ahead of where it was pre-pandemic. So a big part of the conversation when we talk about, communicating our performance to owners has been, we understand that we're down compared to last year, but we're not down compared to the rest of the market. These trends are across the board. And that really has been I don't want to say worldwide, because, for example, in Europe right now, they're having a big boom. But next year, we are anticipating a dip just like we had this year, because they're just about a year behind us in all their trends. And we're seeing almost the exact same things happen overseas as we saw in North America. So all throughout North America, I would say. Our data is a little limited in South America, but we certainly are seeing it in Australia, New Zealand, all over the world. We're seeing the same trends coming. It's just that they're about a year behind us overseas, but certainly throughout North America.
Okay,
so
thank you.
I can geek out on that question all day. we have given a lot of presentations in a lot of different regions of the world, and that's very consistent. So great question, whoever thought that one up.
Thank you.
Let's dive into those Q3 numbers for RevPAR. Again, RevPAR is revenue per available rental night. So this isn't what your average daily rate is in these markets. This is for every night that a unit was on your program in July, for example. In a bleisure market, that unit generated about $448 for every available night in July. And you can see that it's pretty consistent. Again, leisure bringing up the rear here, declined about 25% in all Q3 months. Despite that urban decline in July of 12%, urban Mexican markets battled back to being ahead of 2022 by 1% in September. Business markets saw increases, and they're pretty clearly the bright spots in the rental ecosystem, positive in all three shown months. The bleisure markets decreased about 6% in July, pretty even in August, and then down about 2% in September. So really, the business markets were clearly the bright spots there. So now that we've taken a look at those three metrics, this RevPAR key point starts to fit into strategy on pricing, and we'll get into more of that over the next couple slides. RevPAR really started the year up to over 2022 and started showing decreases from March onward. Q3 is experiencing large decreases of about 20% in July, August, and September. And all markets are showing year-over-year decreases, with leisure showing the largest at about 25%. It's important to find the balance between occupancy and rates using RevPAR to formulate a strategy that optimizes that revenue potential. And it's so important for you to talk to your owners. It's really bottom line. If you took nothing away from all of this, from the whole presentation today, it's going to be about talking to your owners about what's happening at a market level, because there's a huge move and shift to a little bit lower performance than last year, but still solid performance. Let's take a second and let's look at the actual booking and traveler trends here. This is
Daniel, I'm sorry to interrupt. Before you go into this, is it possible? I have Roberto Gracida asking this question. Do you have? This is. I'm sorry. I apologize. This should have been done earlier, but it is about inventory. So Roberto asks basically, do you have a number for leisure market inventory comparison between 2022 versus 2023 versus 2022?
As you can imagine, I don't have that number off the top of my head. However, we do talk about supply shifts in a couple of slides. So I will point that out to you, okay? Great question, because that's definitely where we're headed.
All right.
So let's take a look at these property performance and booking trends. It all ties in. Okay. So average length of stay was similar year over year until May. June through August have had shorter stays than last year, and those declines in stay lengths mean you need to have more guests to reach the same number of booked nights. If you think about it, every 5 houses that decrease by 0.2 nights as a length of stay, that's another night that you have to make up somewhere else in your inventory. So when you see a 0.2 average length of stay decrease, it's a lot bigger deal than people usually think about. So when we move into the different regions and we start to see what's happening from an average length of stay perspective, August decreases were driven by all markets, with bleisure down about 15%, business down 13%, leisure down 7%, and urban down 15%. It's pretty consistent across the board that people are spending a little less time in our rentals, and that's going to be really impactful when we start to look at the total amount of revenue that's coming in during these time periods. Something to take away from the stay length conversation is don't hold out for unicorn bookings because your booking restrictions aren't in line with trends. Revisit stay length restrictions like having a 3-night minimum. Allow yourself to get the shorter booking or the booking at a shorter stay length. It's something that nobody wants to really walk away from, is the longer bookings. But in an effort to get something on the books, it's time to start considering taking those 2-day or 1-night minimums if the property makes sense. So obviously you don't want to do that for a 6-bedroom house. The input cost to clean it isn't there, but a 1-bedroom starts to make sense. If that's not an option for you, add a night promotions have been doing very well around the world, really. Saying, hey, we have this gap night of 1 night, come in a day early. Here's some other things that are going on that you might consider doing. If you've never been to Mexico before, check out this thing. Those are different things that you can do to bring people in a little earlier, move them out a little later, give them some incentive to stay 1 more night or 2 more nights if you've got a lot of gap nights, because that extra day is going to start to make a huge difference in your data over time. So the takeaway for this section is to adjust to current travel trends and special events that might produce different stay patterns compared to previous years. The average booking window also plays into all of this about when you should be changing your pricing. For example, the average booking windows are slightly down, but you can see that they were up at the beginning of the year. They're relatively flat in Q3, but the average booking window ranges from about 33 to 43 days from January to July. Now, as you look to the right side of this graph, you can see that it goes up pretty sharply. That's because we're not there yet, and booking windows are so short now that we're not even to 30 days out from September. So those are clearly going to be further out booking windows as of today. But as we get closer to those time periods and move past them, you'll see those start to come down, and we anticipate them to be pretty flat with where they were last year. For the first 8 months of the year that you can see on this graph, it's pretty flat. We expect that to continue to be pretty similar as we move forward because those lines are so closely correlated to where they were last year. The booking windows aren't changing very much. But when we get into looking at these on a more regional basis, starts to show again that there's still no large shifts in any market or months for average booking window. The September average booking window will come down as the reservations are made. This is just showing that average booking window for people staying in September is pacing the same this year as it did last year. Because people will still book for this year, that average booking window will be a smaller number when we get more of those last-minute bookings. But for what is already on the books, it's not coming in any shorter than it did last year. Since they're very consistent and there's no significant shifts in any market in Q3, it's really important to monitor those booking curves and challenge that standard operating procedure, finding opportunities for small changes can make huge yield gains. It just happens across the board as we start to see people booking just a little bit sooner. So dropping your rate just a little bit to get that booking a little faster. That makes a huge difference in what you can do from an aggression standpoint on rate later. So find the properties that are willing to take a booking at less so that they get a booking, and then move on from there to the ones that are more aggressive. Here's where we start to get into feeder markets. Now, this is my favorite portion of any presentation. I spent 8 years working for an online marketing agency before coming to KeyData. Having this insight is solid gold for anybody in marketing. The reason why is because if I know where my guests are usually coming from, I can target Google AdWords or Facebook ads, even my email marketing to those particular markets, rather than throwing a lot of money at, especially for paid advertising, at the entire United States, for example. We've talked about this a lot at Expo RV. You know, the United States is one of the biggest markets for Mexican travelers, but understanding exactly which American markets can save you a lot of money on Google AdWords and Facebook ads. So let me go back here 1 second. I also wanted to point out from a marketing standpoint that you might want to target some of these markets that people want to get away from. And right now, that's markets like Arizona. Now, it's pretty well known that the Mexican market is fueled largely by US feeder markets. And at KeyData, we use our direct connections with property managers to see where guests are coming from. This is a huge asset. So for our partner property managers in Mexico, here are the top feeder markets for all of Mexico. Again, this is just for our partner property managers. This is where their guests are coming from. If you want to be a partner property manager, please contact me. But you can measure feeder markets any way you want in KeyData, but this is showing by guest check-ins. So the clear winner on guest check-ins in quantities, so the number of visitors that are coming, is Arizona. They're getting 39% of the bookings for our partner property managers in Mexico. They're bringing the most guests of any market. California, Texas, and Washington all produce about 10 to 11% of the check-ins. I also want to point out that CDMX and the Baja of California are providing their fair share as well, making the top 10 list of who's contributing bookings to the Mexican market. So this is where travelers are coming from across the Mexican market. When we start to look at that same information, but looking at it from a revenue perspective, that's spread between Arizona, Texas, and California. Those are the largest producers of rent for Mexico. But there is a shift here as California dropped from the #1 spot in 2022 to the #3 spot this year. That allows Arizona to take over the top spot again, providing the most revenue. So Arizona is the hot market for Mexico right now. It's also extremely hot. You don't need a cardigan to live there. And that's a big deal because we start to see people wanting to leave there during this time of year. So right now, when we start to look at those graphs about occupancy and rate, those are the type of people that we can go after because they want to get out of Arizona. It's 125 degrees. And I know Mexico isn't cool, but it's a lot cooler than 122 degrees. Now, the big difference between the percentage of guests and the percentage of rent is really due to the varying average daily rates in the differing states. So guests from Arizona spend about $223 a night. That's not that much. But guests from Texas spend $591 a night, and California visitors spend $543 a night. So you can go after some of these higher end guests, or maybe you have just a bunch of 1-bedroom condos that are not luxury. They're not, really going to break the bank. If you have those folks that you can go after the Arizonans. There's a huge opportunity there if you understand what the feeder markets are for these properties. So where can you find new people who who don't know about you. Arizona claims the largest percentage of rent. California, Texas, and Washington produce significantly more of Mexico's guest check-ins, and Washington is the fastest growing market in rent and check-ins. So if you haven't tapped into the Washington market, if you're not getting a lot of your guests from Washington, you're missing an opportunity that you can easily find. So geo-marketing strategies like Google AdWords and Facebook ads all offer geo-marketing, encompass established markets, but also go after the emerging markets like Washington if you didn't know about them. Huge opportunity there.
And especially, Daniel, and especially since, remember, on the Expo RV Urban in Mexico City, where Judy had the opportunity to talk about the, how many bookings she's basically doing by herself. I mean, without any OTA, just targeting this information directly to, in a very particular market, that definitely makes a difference.
Huge direct marketing strategy. Yeah. It's you can't target market with the OTAs, but you can directly, and those direct bookings don't come with that extra OTA percentage. So you're exactly right. It's a huge opportunity.
All right, and I have a question from Alejandro Vieira. It says, where do you have data that shows the real down on occupancy, especially probably in Riviera Maya? In this particular case, we are not reviewing, we're basically reviewing major trends, not per area, major trends in a group of cities. But I don't know if you're aware about this, Daniel. Riviera basically is they want to have information in Riviera Maya since May 2023, because it says it has been completely dueling demand over all the main towns. Tulum has increased a lot of with the offer, but the increase has been huge. Any particular feedback that you can give us on what has been happening on Tulum, Daniel?
Sorry, the long question, so lots of parts to that question.
Yeah, it will be, where do you have the data that shows the real down on occupancy, in particular probably in Tulum?
I don't have Tulum occupancy data in here. That's falling under the leisure markets. Again, I believe, Alejandro, would you provide your contact information to Manuel, and I'll follow up with you with the direct Tulum data. That's always
we'll do that. Definitely can do that. And I have also another question. Luis, he says, what is the forecast for the market of Bacalar? I think it's the same. We don't have particular data right now. I just probably just want to continue. Just so you know, I will give you some feedback on what's going to happen with KeyData, because but that's another story. We'll finish. We left Daniel finish his presentation, and I explain to you in a minute what's going to happen with these webinars, in particular of different markets. Carry on.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I just looked this up last week. So I pulled up the Tulum while Manuel was answering, and the top feeder markets for Tulum are Quintana Roo, Miami Beach, Phoenix, Austin, Dallas, Atlanta, Fort Lauderdale, and Houston. So that's the quick and dirty answer for you. I can give you a lot more information than that. But on a per market basis, just when we do these across the entire country of Mexico with no understanding of who's actually going to be on the call, it's really hard to hone in on every market, and we'd be here for hours. So I appreciate the excitement, though. That's awesome. Let's dive into that afterwards. Let's go into our next slide, or our next tool here. We're going to look at booking source. Okay, so another cool piece of what we track in KeyData is where bookings are coming from, and what we can see across Mexico. Again, this is across all of Mexico. We're seeing Airbnb really, they've fallen off a lot this year, but they're still the #1 generation source for revenue per property. Compared to 22. They did lose a ton of revenue this year, and Airbnb is the primary source of revenue across Mexico. But if you see here, direct data is also leading the way, if you will, across Mexico with about $10,383 per property this year versus last year. So this is taking every property that we have and telling us where that revenue is coming from. And by far, it's Airbnb, then Direct, then Vrbo, and then Booking.com. One thing to keep in mind is that Booking.com is charging a lot of money for the per booking fee. And that's been probably the biggest deterrent for people on Booking.com, both anecdotally and as we can see in the data. Airbnb is still crushing it in the market. When we look at the data for all reservations per property in 2023, Booking.com, Direct, and Vrbo are all seeing 0.4 reservations per property, while Airbnb is over triple that at 1.3 reservations per property. So substantial number of the bookings are just coming from Airbnb. So the previous slide, this one, we're looking at revenue per source. This is looking at bookings per property per source. And so that's a huge explanation of where some opportunities might exist, because if they're only getting so many bookings off of Airbnb, fewer people are listing on Booking.com, fewer people are listing on Vrbo, and as you can see, fewer people are actually paying attention to their direct source bookings, and that is extremely important to get into your strategy, because if Airbnb goes away, now what are you left with? That direct booking strategy has got to be part of your overall growth as a company if you want to have a sustained growth. Now let's dive in a little bit to the average stay length by source. Seeing little gains across the board this year versus last year, with the exception of the direct bookings and Vrbo bookings, but that isn't very many bookings. So you are seeing people stay longer when they come through Airbnb, and they're staying longer when they're coming through Booking.com. So if you're trying to lengthen those length of stays, those are two channels that are doing that a little bit better than the others. Vrbo's average booking window did drop about 9 days, from 52 days to 43 days. That's the big move, probably the biggest thing to take away from the OTA section of this data about which ones are providing the best results. Vrbo is really starting to slide off as far as the average booking window goes. Certainly not the amount of business, but the booking window. People are booking shorter stay or closer to the stay on Vrbo. Now, this is where we get into those booking sources by marketing type. Airbnb is the primary source for both leisure and urban markets. Only 5 to 6% of leisure and urban guests are booking direct. I think that's a key number to keep in mind. Again, if the OTAs go away, what are you left with as a company? And that's a scary thing to think about. So if you haven't made urban markets or if you haven't made direct bookings a bigger part of your strategy yet, start looking into what you can do from a marketing perspective to bring people to your website instead of pushing them to the OTAs. I'm always flabbergasted when I log into, or when I go to a website and visit it and I can't book direct on their website. They send me to Airbnb and VRBO. If you're doing that, that's the first thing we need to stop. Okay, so if you're a professional property manager, get them in. Most of you have a property management system. If you don't, it's probably it's time. If you can get people to book direct with you, you save a boatload of money on OTA fees. So huge opportunity for you to add to your bottom line. So Airbnb is the primary source for revenue and reservations. Airbnb guests are staying longer than other sources, and leisure and urban market guests are booking mainly through Airbnb, with a very small proportion of bookings going direct. Gaining insights into the different booking sources can really enhance your ability to capture more reservations far more effectively. Those are some of the takeaways that you can take from the OTA section there. So now we get to Alejandro's question about the supply in the markets. So here we go. As we dive in here, we're seeing large year-over-year shifts in supply. There's growing supply in every market, which makes occupancy for the market much higher. The need for differentiation by professionals from rent by owners is going to be crucial to a successful strategy. What that means is that if you are a property manager, you have some things that other people don't. You have a cleaning crew, first off. So your places are going to be cleaner. We talk a lot about safety and how important safety is. That's a really big deal. You can go to the market and say, look, we're not doing this for fun on the weekends. This is our job. This is our livelihood. We're here to make your vacations better and safer. So having that ability to emphasize how safe you are, the different amenities that you can provide, the cleanliness of your properties, the quality of the properties, those are all things that you can bring out a little more than the average property owner who's renting by themselves rather than going through a property manager. Huge opportunity for you guys. Across the Mexican market, that's not emphasized anywhere near enough. So if you're not emphasizing your safety and cleanliness, you're missing a huge opportunity. Let's look a little bit at the supply. In Mexico, you can see that while both supply and demand are up compared to 2022, the supply is growing way faster than demand. The supply is that is the green line on this screen. And that causes the occupancy to be down year over year. Even though the number of bookings is up, the supply is so much higher than that increased number of bookings that it takes more to capture that demand. So you can see that there's a 12% increase in supply in May compared to last year, 15% increase in June compared to last year, and a 16% increase in July compared to last year, versus 2, 12, and 13 respectively on the number of bookings. So that's the big difference and why that supply change matters. And if we look at that across the different regions, the leisure, business, and urban markets, you can see what those are, with the only exception, business market is the one market that's seeing demand grow faster than supply. And we started to see this all the way back when I did the presentation at Expo RV Urban. The urban markets were killing it at the time. Those are still a lot of the business markets, and you can see that that's been consistent. However, the urban market did start to slip a little bit as far as the number of supply and the amount of demand. So leisure market is seeing the supply grow more than demand. And that's probably one of the biggest factors when we talk about the leisure market being down overall year over year. So supply has been steadily increasing at a much faster pace than demand. The business market is the only one that's seeing more demand growth than supply. And your takeaway here is that the increased supply leads to a heightened competition. So use pricing and marketing strategies, again, to retain the appropriate share of the market. Huge opportunities for you. It's just that it's going to be harder to go in and add those because of the supply.
Hey Daniel, I have a comment from Veronique. Hi Veronique, I hope you're doing well. I would imagine she's right now in Montreal, and her comment is, on the other hand, the more you drive reservations away from Airbnb, the less reservations you get from Airbnb, and the lower you will rank on Airbnb. So you are also shooting yourself in the foot. And this is the thing, and this is why it's so important for us to have direct booking strategy somehow. But great comment. I would appreciate it, Veronique. Carry on, Daniel.
Oh, hugely important. And I want to clarify, I'm not saying to pull your listings from Airbnb. I'm not saying to do anything different on Airbnb than you're already doing. What I am saying is that when somebody stays with you through Airbnb, one thing that you need to be doing is collecting their zip code, for example. Then I also highly encourage you to say, hey, if you ever want to come back, book direct through us and save yourself 10%. Don't do that through the Airbnb app, but do that through your own internal communication with guests. So put those types of things in place. Don't take anything away from Airbnb. Just when they come to you, get them to book direct next time. Also, be reaching out to people through marketing, Google AdWords, Facebook ads, that sort of thing, to get them to book direct with you. And it's a lot more inexpensive when you target specific markets to do those things to get them to book direct with you rather than sending them to Airbnb. So like if you have a website that pushes them to Airbnb, you already had them on your website, they were ready to book. Don't push them somewhere else to book. Have them book through you. That doesn't hurt your performance in Airbnb. I haven't met anybody that has enough traffic to their website that they're going to hurt their Airbnb ranking by getting those direct bookings instead of sending them to Airbnb on purpose. So hugely important distinction there. I don't want you to pull your listings from Airbnb, and I don't want you to change the quality of your photos and all that kind of stuff. Keep on making your Airbnb listings good, but also make your website experience good for booking as well. So now let's get to the big fun thing that I've been talking about since July, because we started to see it in the data. I mentioned anybody who's a big Taylor Swift fan will notice some of the different things that I've thrown in throughout the presentation about song names. And the reason why we're talking about Taylor Swift and why this matters, and a lot of people have been talking about this, but I brought this to Manuel back in, I think, early July. And that is this: the Taylor Swift Eras Tour is next week in Mexico City. And I was pulling up data for Mexico City for a conversation that I was having with the property manager there. And I noticed that we saw this huge spike in occupancy in August. And I said, so is there, like, I don't know, a football match going on? Is there a concert? Is there something going on? And we looked at events in Mexico City, and sure enough, the Eras Tour was coming. So I saw this huge spike in occupancy. And I said, well, I don't want to know what the average daily rate is, because that huge spike in occupancy should mean that there's a huge spike in rate. And we looked at rate, and it was extremely flat. And so what you see here on this line is the occupancy for the weekend of the concerts. You also see the RevPAR for the weekend of the concerts, but you'll see one thing that's not up, and that's the average daily rate for the weekend of the concerts. This is why we need to keep an eye on what's coming in the data. When we start to see an occupancy bump of 1-2%, it's time to start adjusting your rates up slightly. And with KeyData, we give you the ability to see that forward-looking occupancy, so you can see when things start to go up. Because generally across the board, Mexico City property managers lost a huge opportunity this coming weekend by not lifting their rates for the Taylor Swift tour. When you start to see 54% of occupancy during any time in Mexico City, for example, that's a huge boost in occupancy. When we were there for Expo RV Urban, it was Pride weekend, and everybody I saw on the street was staying at a vacation rental, but they didn't even come close. It was like a 4% lift in occupancy, something like that for that weekend. This is a lift of 34% compared to, or excuse me, 54% higher than we were last year. That's huge. And to not have taken advantage of that, that's going to hurt your bottom line. So these are the types of things that we really have to keep an eye on, and keeping an eye on your occupancy pacing year over year is going to give you the opportunity to take advantage of these types of things. It's probably too late for the Taylor Swift tour now, but if you saw this coming, and KeyData would have helped you see it, it's a huge opportunity. Now, that same weekend, this talks a little bit more about how we saw it coming. If ever there was a reason to take advantage of the Expo RV KeyData partnership, this shows it. August 2023, as of June 1st, you can see it was pretty flat. Then people started to get their tickets and make their bookings in August in July, starting July 1st. So between June 1st and July 1st, that red line and that bump, that's the shift in occupancy. And then as of August 14th, so as of last week, you can see where occupancy ended up for that weekend. And it's very clearly a boost to their economy. So these are the types of things that you really got to keep up on to take advantage of those opportunities. So a quick takeaway here, capture special event demand by being prepared with rates and restrictions, push rates higher as compression develops. When we talked about those restrictions, what we're saying is, if you only have a 2-night minimum during Taylor Swift, maybe expand it to 3 nights or watch what the rest of the market is doing. And maybe if you make it a 2-night and you don't have a booking at this point, you might be able to get a booking that you wouldn't have got because your booking rules are a little more flexible. So look at what the market is doing, look at what your rules are, and see if there's an opportunity for you to change just a little to get something in the door. Huge opportunity there as well.
Hey, Daniel, Javier is asking us, with the amount of supply available in Mexico, I'm assuming it's Mexico City, with the lift in ADR being by so much, do you think the ADR number would actually increase for that bump in a Taylor Swift concert?
That's a great question.
He was saying that he has the same, or they saw similar, during Super Bowl.
Right. So big things to think about here. Number one, is your property suited for that, right? If you have a, please don't take this the wrong way, but if you have a bland property, yeah, it's probably not going to help you to just raise your rate. But hang a poster of Taylor Swift inside of it, post that on Airbnb, and jack up your rate $20. These are the opportunities that you have with those types of situations, is that if you have a nice property, you can jack up your rate and people are going to want to stay there. If you start highlighting things like your safety capabilities when somebody's there for Taylor Swift, that's another opportunity. If you just do the same as you've always done and raise your rate, it's probably not going to do that much for you. But if everybody would have seen this coming and everybody would have talked about it, one person raising their rates back in June when the concert was announced, that's when you can start to make those big opportunities and shift your rate up. Everybody else will shift their rate up too, and then it's a race to the top. That's where you see that opportunity for growth. But you're right, if there's too much supply in the market, you have to differentiate yourself to be able to get that higher rate.
Got it. Thank you, Daniel. I think what we're gonna do is gonna find out what are the next concerts for cities like Mexico City, Monterrey, and Guadalajara. That would be great to have.
And it's not just, especially if you're in an urban market and you have something like, if you have a football club, huge opportunity, huge. Because those weekends, people will come for those matches, for big events, universities, anything going on. Look at your current events and really look at what you're doing to capture those. Also, there's tools in KeyData, for example, to track the number of searches for specific weekends. And so you can see what the unconstrained demand is for your properties. And so when people start looking for a specific time frame, really often, we can tell you, hey, this is a popular week that's being searched. It's time to start raising your rates. It's another way that you can see stuff like concert demand. So let's see. The last takeaway here for you. I promised you 10 Swift takeaways. So just like Taylor Swift is constantly growing and improving throughout her career, the vacation rental industry should be constantly reevaluating pricing and marketing strategies to capture those varying levels of demand. Closing with a quote from Taylor Swift here. The lesson I've learned most often is that you're always going to know more in the future than you know now. So with that, here's your 10 Swift takeaways. Be aware, be proactive, be engaged, be flexible, curious, be encompassing, be effective, competitive, prepared, and be a little bit like Taylor Swift. If you have any questions, please reach out to me or Manuel. This was recorded and will be able to be shared. He said it's going to be up on YouTube, so we're excited to share that with you. If you have any questions, reach out to me, Daniel at KeyDataDashboard.com. I really appreciate all your time. And Manuel, do you have anything to add?
Thank you very much, Daniel. Appreciate it. It has been very, very important for us to understand what is happening in these markets. I really appreciate it. One of the things that we need to work out with you with KeyData is probably some sort of a trimester conference where you can give us some information and give us basically overall information and put us up to speed and give us the head ups on what is happening in the market. So definitely something that you and I need to discuss. Takeaways also, I think, I believe we still have the F1 in Mexico, so that would be very important, especially for those properties around or close by the race. That would be very important. And just as Daniel was saying, just try to keep up with the different concerts, different information on what's happening in special events in cities like Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey. And without any other thing, I think that's it for today. I appreciate your information, Daniel, and I look forward to seeing you in Exporento Vacacional in November 8th to the 11th.
I was hey, get signed up if you're not ready for Expo RV. It's can't get much better of a conference than Expo RV. You guys do a great job.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Appreciate it. And all this will be recorded. We will place it on YouTube and the association webpage, so you can look into it. And if you have any other questions, please, call direct Daniel, send in an email. We recently signed an agreement with KeyData. They provide us information. They're very helpful to understand what's happening in the market, and there will be more than glad to help you out on your information needs. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. I appreciate all your time.
All right. Take care, guys. See you.